It begins quietly, not with a disaster, but with a strange stillness inside you. The things that once gave you purpose now feel hollow, and the mask you've worn for years starts to slip. You look around and realize you no longer belong where you used to fit so easily. It's as if life has paused, waiting for you to remember something you've forgotten. Carl Jung called this the moment the soul begins its descent, when the surface of life cracks and the deeper self starts to rise. You're not losing yourself, you're meeting the person you were always meant to become. There comes a time when you no longer recognize the person in the mirror. The dreams, the goals, even the voice in your head, they all begin to fade. It feels like you're falling apart. But in truth, you're falling inward. Carl Jung once said, "You do not find the soul by clinging to the ego. Losing yourself isn't a failure, it's an initiation. When everything you thought you were begins to dissolve, that's when the soul begins to whisper, 'Now, let me show you who you really are.' There comes a moment when the life you built no longer feels like yours. The face you wear, the voice you use, even the thoughts you think, they begin to feel unfamiliar. It's not madness. It's not failure. It's the beginning of losing yourself. And it's the only way to find who you truly are. Carl Jung believed that true transformation often begins with disorientation, the unsettling sense that everything once certain has quietly dissolved. You wake up one day and realize that your ambitions, your relationships, even your faith in who you were, all seem to belong to someone else. This is not a breakdown. It's the threshold of awakening. In Jungian psychology, this stage marks the crisis of the ego. The ego, our conscious identity, the I we think we are, has reached its limits. For years, it's been constructing a narrative of control. This is who I am. This is what I want. This is how the world works. But beneath that polished story, the unconscious has been quietly growing restless. It wants to be known. It wants to be heard. And when it can't be ignored any longer, it breaks through the surface of our carefully arranged lives, often through confusion, loss, or deep emotional fatigue. Most people call this losing direction. Jung called it the call of the self. He wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. The pain is not punishment. It's the tearing away of everything false, everything too small for the vastness of your real nature. When the structures of your life collapse, it's not the end. It's the psyche's way of saying you can no longer live on the surface. The disorientation is sacred. It forces you to turn inward, into the silence where the soul has been waiting." Jung compared this inner collapse to alchemical transformation. Just as lead must melt before becoming gold, the self must dissolve before it can awaken. Everything you've identified with, your job, your role, your name, your past, begins to lose its solidity. And in that moment of psychological free fall, the deeper self begins to breathe. But the mind resists. The ego screams, "Something is wrong!" Because to the ego, control equals safety. To lose it feels like death, and in a sense, it is the death of the false self. The carefully constructed image that kept you from knowing your depth. So if you feel lost, detached, or uncertain, remember this: you are not falling apart, you are being reassembled. The old scaffolding is collapsing so that something truer, more authentic can emerge. This is the disorientation of the soul, the beginning of your real journey. Not the path your mind planned, but the path your soul was always meant to walk. And it always begins with a quiet whisper. You don't know who you are anymore. And that's the first step to truly knowing. Before you can find your soul, the structure built to protect you, the ego, must begin to crumble. It doesn't surrender easily. The ego believes it is you. For most of our lives, we live inside a story, a psychological construct Jung called the ego complex. It's the version of ourselves we've spent years perfecting. The achiever, the friend, the believer, the survivor. It gives us stability, purpose, and a sense of identity. But the ego is also a mask, a necessary illusion that keeps us from being overwhelmed by the vastness of the unconscious. In Jung's view, the ego is like a small island floating on a vast ocean. The ocean represents the unconscious, everything we do not know, cannot control, or have forgotten about ourselves. As long as the island holds together, we feel safe. But life eventually brings waves strong enough to remind us how fragile that island really is. This moment, when the waves rise and the ego begins to crack, is what we experience as collapse. It might come through heartbreak, burnout, loss, or a quiet emptiness that words can't explain. The forms differ, but the message is the same. Your current identity is too small for who you're becoming. The collapse of the ego feels like destruction, because the ego confuses control with existence. When life stops obeying its rules, it panics. It tells you something is wrong, that you're broken, that you're failing. But from a Jungian perspective, this collapse is not chaos. It's reorganization. It's the psyche redistributing power from the surface self to the deeper self, the one that has been waiting patiently beneath your social mask. Jung warned that if we cling to the ego too tightly, the unconscious will force its way in through symptoms, anxiety, depression, compulsions, or emotional numbness. These are not enemies to be suppressed. They are messages. Each symptom is the unconscious saying, something in you is ready to evolve. The ego's collapse, then, is an invitation, not a punishment. It asks us to witness our own illusions. Who am I when I'm not performing? Who am I without my roles, achievements, and stories? Who am I when silence answers back? It's a frightening question, because the ego doesn't know how to exist without control. But what follows the collapse is not emptiness. It's space for the unknown, space for the soul to enter. Jung often described this moment as a form of psychological death, but unlike physical death, this death brings life. The false self disintegrates so that the authentic self can breathe. It's not a fall into darkness. It's a descent into meaning. If you're in that space now, unsure, disconnected, stripped of certainty, know that this is the natural rhythm of transformation. The ego must dissolve before wholeness can emerge. So let the story and let the mask fall, because what's dying is not you. It's everything that kept you from meeting who you truly are. The collapse of the ego is not your destruction. Jung would remind us it is your liberation. When the light of your old life fades, the darkness that follows isn't a punishment. It's a passage, a descent into the depth of who you are. Jung once wrote that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The dark night of the soul is this exact process, when the light of certainty, identity, and purpose disappears, and you are forced to walk by the dim glow of your inner awareness. It's not depression, though it can feel like it. It's not failure, though it shatters what you thought was success. It's the psyche's way of rebalancing itself, of turning your attention inward when the outer world no longer satisfies the inner hunger for truth. During this time, the ego has collapsed, but the new self has not yet formed. You are between worlds, too awake to return to who you were, yet not fully alive as who you're becoming. It's a spiritual limbo, a psychological winter, and like every winter, it asks for patience, silence, and surrender. Jung believed this darkness was not an enemy, but an ally. In myths and dreams, it's symbolized as the cave, the underworld, the womb of transformation. The descent is necessary because the treasures of the soul lie buried in places the ego fears to go. To find them, you must walk through uncertainty, isolation, and inner chaos. At first, you might resist. You might search for distractions, new goals, new relationships, new meanings, anything to escape the emptiness. But the more you resist, the deeper the darkness feels, because the night does not leave until it has done its work. And its work is this: to strip you of everything that is not essential. In this space, your ambitions fade, your attachments loosen, even your faith may tremble, but what remains, the raw, silent awareness beneath it all, that is the soul beginning to awaken. Jung observed that the psyche has its own natural drive toward wholeness. The dark night is how it restores balance, by forcing what was repressed, denied, or forgotten into awareness. Dreams intensify, emotions surface, old wounds reopen. The unconscious is speaking, it's saying, "Stop running. I'm here." Many people turn back here. They cling to distraction, hoping to rebuild the old self. But those who endure, who stay present in the silence, who let the darkness breathe, discover something profound. They begin to sense that the darkness is not empty at all. It's alive, it's sacred, and within it, a new light begins to flicker, not the artificial light of ego, but the quiet, steady radiance of the soul. So if your path feels hidden, if you're walking through shadow, don't rush to escape it. The night is your teacher. Its silence is your guide, for it's only in the absence of everything false that the truth of who you are can finally be heard. The dark night of the soul, Jung might say, isn't the end of the path. It's the place where the path truly begins. The deeper you travel into yourself, the more faces you begin to see. Not all of them are beautiful, and not all of them are kind, but each one of them is you. After the collapse and the long night of disorientation, something begins to stir within the darkness, something that watches, waits, and whispers. Jung called it the shadow. The shadow is everything you've disowned, denied, or buried within yourself. It's the anger you suppress to stay good, the envy you hide behind politeness, the fear that wears a mask of control, the potential you never allowed to live because it didn't fit your image. From Jung's view, the human psyche is not purely light. It's a unity of opposites, conscious and unconscious, persona and shadow, self and mask. To become whole, you must integrate what you have rejected. You must meet the darkness within, not to destroy it, but to understand it. Most of us build our identities by pretending certain parts of us don't exist. We say, "I'm not selfish, I'm not angry, I'm not weak," but the psyche doesn't erase these traits. It hides them. They slip into the unconscious, where they grow in power and begin to shape our lives from behind the scenes. They appear in projections, the things we hate or admire in others, what we reject in ourselves. We meet in the world as conflict or obsession. That's why Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. When you feel an emotional charge, anger, jealousy, contempt, fear, that's your shadow calling. It's the hidden part of you saying, "Look at me, I belong to you too." Meeting the shadow is uncomfortable. It challenges your identity, exposes your contradictions, and forces you to admit you are not only light, but within that confrontation lies immense power. Because what you suppress controls you. What you face transforms you. In Jungian analysis, this stage is called shadow integration. It's not about indulging darkness. It's about owning it consciously, recognizing that your anger can become assertiveness, your fear can become awareness, your envy can become aspiration. Each shadow aspect, when brought into light, turns from poison to medicine. The shadow is not evil. It's simply the unlived part of you, the energy trapped in denial. When you reclaim it, your life begins to feel fuller, more real, more balanced. You stop needing to pretend. You stop fighting yourself. And in that reconciliation, the first seeds of wholeness begin to bloom. Still, this process demands courage. The shadow won't reveal itself all at once. It comes in dreams, in slips of emotion, in encounters that trigger the deepest parts of you. You learn to listen, to dialogue, to integrate rather than judge. Each time you do, another fragment of your lost self returns home. No tree, Jung wrote, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach. Down to hell, to meet the shadow is to descend into those roots, to touch the dark soil from which growth emerges. And When you finally stop running from what you fear inside, you discover something astonishing. The shadow you've been avoiding was never trying to harm you. It was always trying to make you whole. When you stop trying to control life, something remarkable happens. Another intelligence begins to move through you. Quiet. Ancient and infinitely wise, Jung called it the unconscious. For most of our lives, we believe consciousness, the rational, thinking part of us, is in charge. We set goals, make decisions, plan our futures, but beneath the thin surface of awareness lies a vast and invisible field of psychic energy, the unconscious mind that shapes nearly everything we feel, choose, and become. Jung described the unconscious as a living system, not just a storage of forgotten memories, but a creative force that speaks through symbols, dreams, intuition, and emotion. It's the hidden architect of our lives, guiding us toward wholeness, often in ways we don't immediately understand. When the ego collapses and the shadow emerges, the unconscious begins to take the lead. It's as if the psyche says, "Now that you've stopped pretending to know everything, let me show you the rest." This process can feel mysterious, even chaotic. Dreams intensify. Coincidences appear. Emotional patterns resurface. But these are not random. They are communications, messages from the deeper layers of the self, trying to help the conscious mind realign with the truth it has forgotten. Jung called these events synchronicities. Oh, meaningful coincidences that seem to defy logic, but reveal hidden order. They remind us that the psyche is not separate from life. It is life. And when we learn to listen to the unconscious, life itself begins to feel more like a dialogue than a struggle. But listening is difficult. The ego loves control. The unconscious speaks in mystery. Its language is symbolic, not literal. A dream of drowning may not be about water, but about being overwhelmed by emotion. A recurring image of a locked door might mean a part of you is ready to open. To understand the unconscious, you must learn to think in images, not words. This is why Jung placed such importance on dream work and active imagination. In dreams, the unconscious speaks directly, unfiltered by logic or social masks. By recording, reflecting and dialoguing with these images, we begin to build a bridge between the seen and unseen worlds within us. The goal is not to control the unconscious, but to cooperate with it, to realize that it's not an enemy to be conquered, but a partner in your evolution. When consciousness and unconsciousness begin to communicate, life becomes richer, layered with depth, mystery, and purpose. Jung often compared the unconscious to nature, wild, powerful, and healing if approached with respect. Ignore it, and it rebels through chaos and symptoms. Listen to it, and it guides you toward integration, toward becoming who you truly are. This is why losing yourself isn't truly losing, as it's surrendering to a wiser intelligence that knows where your soul belongs. Your dreams, your intuitions, your strange coincidences, they're all whispers from the deeper mind, reminding you that you are more than your thoughts. Until you make the unconscious conscious, Jung wrote. It will direct your life and you will call it fate. To awaken, then, is not to conquer the darkness, but to walk beside it, to listen, to translate, and to allow the wisdom of the unconscious to lead you home. There comes a moment when the pieces begin to move again, not to rebuild who you were, but to reveal who you've always been. After the collapse, the shadow work, and the dialogue with the unconscious, the psyche begins to reorganize itself. It's as though something deep within you, something wiser and older than your conscious mind, starts to weave meaning out of the chaos. Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming whole. Unlike what the ego desires, individuation isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming complete. It's the gradual integration of every part of you, light and dark, conscious and unconscious, masculine and feminine, broken and healed, into one unified self. In Jung's model, the self, with a capital S, is the center of the psyche, the totality of who you are, both known and unknown. It's the inner compass that guides your growth, the hidden pattern behind the events of your life. Individuation is the process of aligning your outer personality with that inner truth. But this path is rarely linear. It doesn't move from darkness to light in a straight line. It spirals, looping through patterns and lessons until understanding deepens into transformation. You begin to notice that life keeps placing mirrors before you. Relationships, losses, synchronicities, all designed to reveal what remains unhealed or unseen. And slowly, through awareness, these fragments begin to come home. During individuation, you start to reclaim what was once rejected. Your anger becomes strength, your vulnerability becomes empathy, your chaos becomes creativity. The traits you once hid from the world become the very sources of your authenticity. But individuation also requires humility, the willingness to admit you are not entirely in control of your evolution. The unconscious has its own rhythm. Sometimes it pulls you inward, demanding solitude. Other times it pushes you outward, into connection, creation, or confrontation. Your task is to trust this movement, to live as both participant and observer in your own unfolding. Jung described individuation as a kind of sacred alchemy, the lead of the personality, heavy with fear, ego, and habit, is gradually transmuted into gold, awareness, compassion, and authenticity. This is not a quick or comfortable process. It's a lifelong dialogue with the soul. But those who walk this path begin to radiate something rare, a quiet solidity, a depth of presence that comes only from integration. As individuation deepens, the boundaries between inner and outer reality begin to soften. You start to see your life not as a series of random events, but as a meaningful pattern unfolding with purpose. Your suffering begins to make sense, not as punishment, but as preparation, and the person you once thought you had lost starts to return, not as the old self, but as a truer, fuller version of you. The privilege of a lifetime, Jung wrote, is to become who you truly are. That is the essence of individuation, not to escape your humanity, but to embody it completely, to walk with both your darkness and your light, without denying either, to see yourself not as divided but whole, and in that wholeness, a quiet realization dawns: you were never lost. You were only unfolding, slowly, beautifully, into the self that has been waiting for you all along. Within every man lives an image of woman, within every woman an image of man. These are not lovers of the outer world, they are the unseen partners of the soul. In Jung's map of the psyche, beyond the shadow lies another gateway, one that leads us deeper into balance and wholeness. He called it the realm of the anima and animus, the inner feminine within man, and the inner masculine within woman. To Jung, these are not genders, but archetypal energies, symbolic expressions of the soul's dual nature. They are the bridges between the conscious and the unconscious, logic and intuition, strength and sensitivity. And until these two forces come into harmony, the psyche remains incomplete. For a man, the anima represents the inner world of feeling, imagination, intuition, and receptivity. She appears in dreams as a woman, sometimes nurturing, sometimes destructive, reflecting how he relates to his own emotional depth. When she is ignored or projected outward, he may chase her image in relationships, idealizing or resenting women without realizing he's seeking his own lost sensitivity. When he begins to integrate her, to listen, to feel, to soften, he becomes more whole. He learns that vulnerability is not weakness, but a bridge to authenticity. For a woman, the animus embodies intellect, reason, assertiveness, and inner strength. He appears in dreams or imagination as a guide, a critic or a voice of conviction. When unintegrated, he may dominate her thoughts with judgment or doubt. or be projected onto men as authority or savior. But when she brings him into balance, when she learns to trust her inner authority, she awakens a calm and powerful clarity. Jung believed that every human being contains both these energies, masculine and feminine, logic and intuition, order and chaos. They are not opposites, but complements. The goal is not to erase one, but to unite them in conscious partnership. In modern life, this balance is often distorted. We are taught to favor the rational over the intuitive, the active over the receptive. Men are told to suppress softness. Women are told to suppress power. But in doing so, we exile half of our soul, and the journey toward individuation calls us to reclaim it. When the inner marriage between anima and animus begins, a deep harmony arises. Decisions feel guided by both heart and mind. Action flows with intuition. Stillness carries strength. Relationships become mirrors of balance, not battlegrounds of projection. The world outside starts to reflect the union within. The meeting of two personalities, Jung said, is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. The same is true within us. When the inner masculine meets the inner feminine, both are transformed. Logic becomes compassionate, emotion becomes wise, and the self, once divided, begins to move as one. This is not an abstract ideal. It's a lived experience. You begin to speak with more presence. You listen more deeply. You move through the world with a quiet confidence, rooted in the knowledge that the strength within you does not deny softness, and the softness does not diminish strength. The union of anima and animus is one of the final gates on the path to wholeness. It's the alchemy that completes the soul's descent and ascent. And when the two finally embrace, a new consciousness is born, not masculine, not feminine, but human, whole, and divine. When the inner marriage is complete, Jung might whisper, the soul no longer seeks its reflection in another. It becomes the reflection itself. There comes a silence after the storm. When the masks have fallen, the shadows have been faced, and the war within finally begins to rest. In that stillness, something ancient awakens. Jung called it the self. The self, in Jungian psychology, is not the ego, not the personality you show the world, nor the identity you defend. It's the center and totality of your being, the part of you that has been silently guiding every fall, every awakening, every loss, and every rediscovery. It is the axis around which your conscious and unconscious mind revolve, the unseen architect of your becoming. While the ego says, I am, the self whispers, I'm all that you are, and all that you are not yet. The self is not found through control or effort. It reveals itself when resistance dissolves, when the walls between your inner fragments finally crumble, and everything within you is allowed to belong. In that moment, you no longer feel divided between good and bad, success and failure, light and dark. You simply are. To awaken to the self is to experience a profound sense of unity, not as a thought, but as a living awareness. You begin to see that the world around you is not separate from the world within you, that your pain and your purpose were never opposites, but twin currents in the same river. In this stage, the ego is no longer the ruler. It becomes the servant of a greater order. You stop striving to define who you are and instead begin to live from a deeper knowing, the quiet confidence that life itself is expressing through you. Jung described this as self-realization, the moment when consciousness recognizes its source in something vast, timeless, and whole. This awakening is subtle. It rarely comes with fireworks or revelation. Often, it feels like an ordinary peace that quietly replaces years of inner conflict. You still have preferences, flaws, and fears, but they no longer define you. They are simply waves passing over the still surface of being. The self does not seek perfection. It seeks balance, the dance of opposites moving in harmony, joy and sorrow, creation and destruction, solitude and connection, all become part of the same sacred pattern. You begin to sense that even your suffering had meaning, that every descent into darkness was a preparation for light. In this realization, gratitude replaces resistance. You start to see your life as a dialogue with something divine, something that has been speaking through every coincidence, every dream, every heartbreak. You are no longer trying to fix yourself. You are remembering yourself. The self, Jung wrote, is our life's goal, for it is the fullest expression of that fateful combination we call individuality. To live from the self is to live in truth, not the truth of the mind, but of being. It's the freedom that comes when you no longer chase meaning, because you've become the meaning itself. You move through life with calm intensity, doing what calls you, loving what's before you, and trusting what unfolds. And perhaps this is what Jung meant when he said that the journey inward is the greatest adventure. Because at its end, you discover that the person you were seeking was never lost. They were simply waiting in the quiet center of your soul for you to come home. After the long descent, after the collapse, the shadow, the silence, you find yourself standing in the same world. Yet everything feels different. The outer life remains, but the inner one has changed forever. In myth and psychology alike, every transformation ends with a return. The hero does not stay in the cave or the underworld. They come back, carrying the treasure they found within. In Jungian terms, this is the moment when the self begins to live through the personality, when the soul starts expressing itself through ordinary human life. You still wake up to work, to family, to noise and deadlines, but beneath all that, something quieter moves through you, a calm awareness that was born in the dark night and strengthened by the descent. You no longer move to escape yourself. You move to express yourself. This is what Jung meant by living symbolically, allowing each moment of your life to reflect something sacred within you. The people you meet are not random. They mirror aspects of your psyche. Your work becomes not just a career, but a form of service. Even your challenges begin to feel like invitations, reminders from the unconscious to stay awake. But returning is not easy. The outer world moves fast. While the soul moves slowly, society celebrates achievement, not awareness. Noise, not silence. And so the awakened one often feels like a stranger among the familiar, someone walking through the same streets, yet seeing them through entirely new eyes. The task now is integration, to bring the depth you've found into the surface of daily life, to let your relationships reflect your authenticity, to let your choices align with meaning, to let your silence speak through action. This is where spirituality meets embodiment, where theory becomes living truth. It's easy to have insight in isolation. It's harder to live it among people, but every conversation, every setback, every mundane task becomes sacred ground for practice. Because the soul doesn't seek escape from the world, it seeks presence within it. Jung believed that the true measure of individuation was not enlightenment, but integration, the ability to carry the inner light into the outer darkness, to participate fully in the human story without losing connection to the divine one. And so, the return is not the end of the journey. It's the beginning of a new kind of living, one where the conscious and unconscious move together, where intuition guides reason, where love is not attachment, but recognition. You begin to speak with less noise, but more truth. You listen not to reply, but to understand. You create not to impress, but to reveal, and in those small acts of alignment, the world around you subtly begins to change. The privilege of a lifetime, Jung said, is to become who you truly are. But the purpose of that becoming is not to escape life, it is to return to it, carrying the light of awareness into the heart of the ordinary. Because in the end, the soul's journey is not about transcendence, it's about presence. It's about walking through the noise with silence inside you, about seeing the divine not in distant heavens, but in the faces you meet, the breath you take, the life you live. moment to moment, and that is the quiet miracle of the return. You come back to the same world, but this time you bring eternity with you. There is no final arrival, no last awakening, no perfect peace that ends the search. The journey itself is the destination, and wholeness is not a place you reach, but a way of walking through the world. After all the transformation, all the falling and rising, you realize something subtle but profound, that the self you have been seeking was never waiting at the end of the path. It was walking beside you all along. Wholeness, in Jung's view, isn't the absence of conflict or pain. It's the ability to hold opposites, joy and sorrow, love and loss, shadow and light, within the same heart, without needing to deny either. It's the capacity to live fully awake, yet fully human. You still feel fear, but it no longer defines you. You still make mistakes, but they no longer destroy you, because beneath every rise and fall, you sense the quiet pulse of something unshakable, the self, holding everything together. Jung often said that life is a process of becoming symbolic. Everything you encounter, every person, every loss, every moment of beauty, is a reflection of something happening within. When you begin to see the world this way, nothing feels wasted. Every chapter becomes sacred, every ending becomes initiation. And perhaps this is the true freedom the soul seeks, not escape from the cycle, but peace within it. You begin to understand that the descent, the darkness, the doubt, they were never detours, they were the way itself. CET, path of breaking was the path of becoming. The mind asks for certainty, the soul asks for depth, and when you finally stop demanding that life makes sense, you start to see that it already does. Just not in the language the ego understands. You are not the person you were when this journey began. Something in you has softened. Something else has strengthened. You move more slowly now, but with greater purpose. You listen more deeply, speak less quickly, and love more quietly. You have become the stillness you once sought, and yet the journey continues. For every wholeness you reach opens the door to a deeper layer of the soul. Each integration reveals another mystery, another frontier of consciousness waiting to be known. The psyche, like the cosmos, is infinite, and the self, that quiet center of being, is both your compass and your home. The soul, Jung wrote, is not a problem to be solved, but a living being to be experienced. So, you keep walking, not toward perfection, but toward presence. Not to escape the human story, but to live it with eyes wide open, to love, to fail, to heal, to begin again, knowing that each moment is another step in the eternal dance between what you are and what you are becoming. And maybe, as the journey fades into silence, you finally understand that losing yourself was never the tragedy, it was the invitation, the soul's way of saying, come home, not to who you were, but to who you've always been. This is silence depth, where losing yourself is how you find the soul.